times 1 minus tax rate. Okay. But my net income is also a sum of those two. So if I told you that take all the inputs as given, but suppose we didn't know what depreciation should be, okay? This is net income. If that is the depreciation, this is what the net income should be, because net income is the sum of dividends and change in retained earnings. So I'm going to change my unknown to depreciation, make that green. It's absurd that depreciation is negative, but remember, I just made the numbers up. So what if I made this thing something like that? Okay. This is Excel basically solving the equation for you. If I told you that I didn't know the costs given a depreciation, just change it to cost. And let's say my depreciation was 3,500. It just solves it for you. Alternatively, you just use this equation. So in this specific problem, the order doesn't matter, but I'm kind of anal about it. So what is my net income? Dividends plus change in retained earnings. In this specific problem, it's 1250 and 200. All right. So my costs are sales 20,000 minus depreciation 35 minus interest 115 minus net income 3450 divided by 1 minus tax rate. It should be exactly the same number. So whichever one is easier for you. You can do it through algebra. You can do it through the solver template that I'm going to give you guys. It doesn't matter to me how you do it, because mathematics is not about using the hardest way to do it. Some of you, for reasons that are too numerous to discuss, do not have the basic algebra skills. It is what it is. And at this point, it's too late to do something about it. Unless, I spend about 3 weeks with you guys before the semester starts and give you those. Even if I wanted to do it and I did something about it, I can guarantee you not more than 5% of you would show up for that one. It is what it is. So I give you alternative ways of solving problems. As long as you're able to solve the problem, whether you do it using algebra or whether you let the computer solve it for you, doesn't matter. I mean, this is simple algebra, but sometimes you make mistakes. All right, in the 30 minutes we have left, let's talk about the cash flow concept. The concept we use is cash flow from assets, CFFA, which is also known as sometimes free cash flow. This is a measure of how much cash the firm has generated that is free to distribute to shareholders and the creditors. So we have two definitions. The first one is sources of cash flow. CFFA equals operating cash flow, which we're going to define, minus net capital spending, minus change in net working capital. We can write OCF as net income plus depreciation plus interest expense. Remember, depreciation and interest expenses are not operating expenses. Even though depreciation is part of operating expenses, it is not cash. It's a non-cash expense. And net capital spending, you can calculate it two ways. Change in net fixed assets and add back depreciation, or depending upon which type of information you're given, purchases of new fixed assets minus sales of existing fixed assets, but in their book value. Let's look at, I think we have Starbucks here. Let's look at the balance sheet. This is annual. Total non-current assets, which are the fixed assets. From 2022 to 2023, it went up by about $1.2 billion. Now, that doesn't mean that Starbucks spent only $1.2 billion. Let's think of a hypothetical scenario. The firm does not buy new fixed assets, no new machinery, no buildings, and doesn't sell any of the existing ones. We know that firm has not made any capital spending, fixed capital spending. But that doesn't mean that change in net fixed assets is going to be zero. Because the way net fixed assets move, even if you haven't bought or sold any new assets, you start with your old value, you deduct any depreciation and amortization. That's why we add it back. In this case, if you go to cash flow statements, they also charged $1.5 billion in depreciation. That means net capital spending for Starbucks is not 1.2 billion. It's 2.7 actually. If the problem you're working on gives you purchases of new fixed assets and sales of existing fixed assets, let's say problem said you bought $1 million worth of new fixed assets. You also sold some of your existing fixed assets for $500,000. The number that you're going to use for sales is not the sales amount. What was the book value of those assets at the time you sold them? Let's say at the time you sold things that were already fully depreciated. So in your books, if I bought this sold this computer that was 4 years old. You can write off computers all the way to zero in 4 years. He basically sold it to someone for $100. That entire $100 goes to your profits.